This morning I'd like to discuss with you about the wall, the gate, and the table. 2 weeks ago in our homily, we examined the history of the altar rail. We traced its origins from the old Jewish temple all the way to the present day. And what we saw was an unbroken line of tradition from one generation to the next, all the way up until the 60s and 70s when altar rails were removed. But this unbroken line of tradition is reason enough that we should think about bringing back the rails. Today, I'd like to give other reasons why the altar rail is a great gift to us. For the altar rail serves for at least three things for us. It serves as a sacred wall, a heavenly gate, and a Eucharistic table. To the first, the altar rail as a sacred wall. A mention of walls, barriers, fences today, they have a bad connotation. We're told that they create division, exclusion. I've heard it said, and maybe you have too, that we need a world without walls, without borders, and we must build bridges and tear down the walls. There's some truth to that, but on the contrary, walls can be very good. In fact, they're needed. On this side of heaven, we will always need walls. I believe we need to reclaim what I call a positive philosophy of walls, because they can be of great benefit. Here's the important thing about walls. They create meaningful distinction. Walls tell us that one thing isn't like the other. Your side of the property is not my side of the property. This side of the border is Alberta. This side is Saskatchewan. On one side, you cheer for the Stampeders, the other side, the Riders. Or at least you should. Walls give meaningful distinction, and in doing so, they tell us how to act on one side or the other. I won't have a barbecue on your side of the fence, but I will on mine. Although if you weed on your side of the fence, you can come over to my place too. Walls, while not only providing meaningful distinction, they also signify importance. Because what do we fence off? We fence off that which is most important to us. We'll see this in museums. There's some items you can get close to and touch, but other items are what? They're fenced off. And those are the most precious items, the most treasured. And this philosophy of walls is one of the reasons why the church has consistently had altar rails, which is a sacred wall. Because the altar rail signifies distinction and importance. The altar rail tells us that this space that I'm standing in is not like the other spaces in the church. It also signifies that it's the most important space in the church. It's why we call it a sanctuary, which literally means a holy place or a space set apart. And so we set it apart with a sacred wall. And here's the beauty of the altar rail. When it's present, we don't even have to tell people with words that this is an important space. They know it intuitively. A few weeks ago here at the church, I had a prayer service with Bishop Mary and their grads and families. Many people who attended weren't Catholic. After the service had concluded, people were slowly making their way out of the church, when all of a sudden a toddler made a beeline for the altar, which happens every now and then here at Our Lady of Lourdes, which is okay. But the mother, who wasn't Catholic, was mortified, and she apologized to me profusely. And she did this because she knew intuitively that the sanctuary was an important place, a holy one, in large part thanks to the presence of the altar rail. On the other hand, when the altar rail isn't present, there's a danger of treating the sanctuary like a stage. A stage is something for performance. And so you'll set up your instruments here, the keyboard and the guitar. And if you need room for the drums, you'll just move the altar, because you gotta have room for the drums. And you know, I was part of this back in the day when I helped out with youth retreats. And as I look back, I cringe. For the sanctuary is not a stage. It's a holy place which represents heaven. I realized that it wasn't always my fault back then. It was more the fault of the church architecture. For I'm convinced if there were an altar rail in the churches, we would have never treated the sanctuary like a stage. It is the most important space we have in our church. The altar rail signifies this. And speaking of importance, this brings me to my second point. And don't worry, my points are getting shorter. Yeah. The altar rail is not only a sacred wall, but it's a heavenly gate. For the sanctuary represents heaven. And so how beautiful it is to see the priest representing Christ, walk through the gates into heaven, where we're called to follow. But a barrier remains, the altar rail, because we're not there yet. The altar rail reminds us that we have work to do, that we are striving for the life of heaven. But we're privileged to come to the gates of heaven, to the edge where God meets us. Which brings me to my third point. The altar rail is not only a sacred wall and a heavenly gate. Lastly, it's a Eucharistic table where God meets us, where Jesus, the heavenly Son of God, comes down to us face to face and feeds us with his body, blood, soul, and divinity. At the edge of heaven, the sacred wall, the heavenly gate, and the Eucharistic table. Such is the gift of the altar rail. God bless you, God love you. Amen.